Hello and welcome to another episode, a special Sidecar episode of Fusion Patrol. I'm Eugene.
And I'm Simon.
And tonight we're going to be looking at the special animated Time Lord Victorious story called Daleks! With an exclamation point. It's a 5-part animated YouTube series, just in case you want to go check it out. Synopsis! Episode 1. The Daleks arrive on the planet Islos, planning to capture the archive. The robotic defenders of the archive resist in a futile effort against the might of the Daleks. The Dalek strategist suggests that the robotic defenders might sacrifice all the life on the planet to serve their purpose of protecting the archive at all costs. The Emperor offers them a deal. Let us have it, or we'll destroy it. The robots surrender, but it is a ruse. They have used knowledge in the archive to open a portal to another dimension, found an entity there that would offer safe haven there for the archive and the inhabitants of the city. All at once in exchange is the Daleks. Episode 2. The Daleks flee to Skaro, being dealt significant damage along the way. When they arrive at Skaro, the entity, which can traverse time, is already there, and the planet is wiped out. The few remaining Daleks travel to the planet that has a Dalek army in storage, guarded by a lone robot. The strategist has it activated, but the robot has been got to by the entity and reprograms the Daleks to think the strategist is the Emperor. The entity expects the strategist to start a war with the Emperor, but he does not, and he has the Dalek army destroyed. Episode 3. The Daleks head to the planet of the Mechanoids. They demand an alliance, but the bluff is called. The Mechanoid Queen has determined that the Daleks are all but wiped out. She enters talks with the Emperor while the strategist talks with a Mechanoid scientist. Meanwhile, the remaining minion Daleks get impatient and start a fight. They are destroyed by the Mechanoids. The Emperor has an ace up his plunger to force the Mechanoids to fight. He's led the entity to the planet, and it begins attacking. Episode 4. Forced to work together, the strategist and the scientist defeat the entity and send it back to its universe. Now, only the Emperor and the strategist remain. The Mechanoid Queen knows they have been used by the Daleks, and she's going to wipe them out. She kills them both on the spot, and the story ends. Except, she doesn't. She tells them to go back to Skaro, and she'll be along shortly to wipe them out. End of episode. Episode 5. The Emperor and the strategist arrive back on Skaro. The Mechanoids soon arrive. The Emperor had more Daleks in reserve somewhere, and the fighting begins. Outnumbered, the Mechanoids need an advantage. They capture the strategist and offer him what he wants. He takes their offer. With their help, they use the same technique to eliminate the entity on Mechanus to get rid of the Emperor on Skaro. But it was a ruse. The strategist uses the weapon to eliminate all of the Mechanoids. Dalek victory! But then, entity-controlled bits of dead Mechanoids tell them that they don't know what's coming. End of episode. Episode 6. There is no episode 6. I guess that was the end. Okay. Daleks! I'm going to start, and I'm going to say that there are two major things going against this, in my mind. 1, Daleks. 2, I dislike the idea of Time Lord Victorious. I hate bundles.
We ought to explain what the idea of Time Lord Victorious is, just to give a bit of context to this.
Please do.
So Time Lord Victorious, this is just the background for it, because Daleks is supposed to be a standalone adventure in its own right. Time Lord Victorious is a project to link together stories across all of the various different spin-off media that produce Doctor Who, shall we call it merchandise? Doctor Who stories, perhaps. So the novels, the comics, the audios that are produced by both Big Finish and the BBC, and even things like immersive adventure games. And one of the kind of spin-offs, I guess, is this free YouTube series. And I think the kind of background to this is relevant for two reasons. So one is, obviously, they are hoping that a certain type of Doctor Who collector is going to buy everything that is connected with Time Lord Victorious. It's probably the same kind of Doctor Who collector who is already buying everything connected with Doctor Who, so it may not make a great big difference, but they are attempting to do it in a way that caters for the casual listener, reader, viewer, whatever, by making the elements within it stand alone. And I think I'm right in saying that you and I have not consumed all of the Time Lord Victorious Doctor Who that has been released thus far. Certainly in my case, it was this and one Big Finish story.
So you're up on me because this is the only one. And I was listening to the Big Finish podcast the other day, and there are a few stories in Time Lord Victorious in the Big Finish range that I'm interested in. But I really dislike this kind of strong arm marketing. Because a lot of times, so if you go back to comics, like Marvel Comics used to be horrific about this. They would start a story in Spider-Man, which you would read all the time, and then suddenly it'd be like, oh, and he meets up with Iron Man, and in the next issue of Iron Man, they'll continue their fight. And I don't like Iron Man, so I would never collect Iron Man. So what I would end up getting is a story that was incomplete, and I really detested that as a kid. I mean, I loathe it. So when they announced this, I was very, very annoyed. And I was listening to the Big Finish podcast, and I mean, Nick Briggs spent, I don't know, it seemed like about an hour and a half, but, you know, a lot of times they seem like an hour and a half. But yeah, at least 5 minutes explaining that no, everything in Time Lord Victorious is totally standalone, and you can absolutely listen to it and enjoy it by itself, and you don't have to get it all. And, you know, it's been scientifically designed not to do that. And this being the only Time Lord Victorious thing I've consumed, I feel like they've lied to me. And this is Big Finish, too, right? Behind it, sort of. I thought they were the story people behind this.
I don't think so. I mean, there's no credit for them on it, and there usually would be.
All right. I somehow thought that they were you know, underlying story people behind it, but I'll believe you. So maybe Big Finish has kept to their promise, but I don't feel like they did here, because I don't feel like I got a whole story, and I feel like they were setting me up for the next book or whatever it is. I really feel like they were setting me up for the next thing. Something with the Doctor in it, perhaps. So
okay, that's interesting, because I mean, clearly I've had two of them now, so that may or may not be enough to spot patterns and connections.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in where you think this was setting up other stories that you need to you now need to pursue in order to understand what was going on here.
I don't need anything to understand what was going on here, but what I clearly seeing in the end is when the entity is like, yep, you don't know what's coming, here it comes. That's clear, leaving you off for they've got something else in mind as the next step here. There is something else and more.
So yeah. No, if that's it, yeah. No, I can see that. That doesn't bother me, and the reason for that is because it's completely not integral to the story. The story stands alone, and then you get a scene on the end. And it feels to me like this in He Kills Me Not, that the story itself stands alone, and then you get a scene at the end that is a cliffhanger for what I presume is the next Big Finish story in the sequence. And I'll probably listen to it because I quite enjoyed the audio, but it doesn't bother me that there's a tack. It's like a trailer for the next thing.
If it's the next Big Finish, that's not quite as bad. If it's the next comic book,
yes.
or if it's the next novel, then that's bad. I mean, if whatever follows this Daleks,
I'm assuming it's
is a novel.
Finish, but I mean it doesn't bother me because if I never listen to the story, it doesn't really change what I've just listened to. If you see what I mean.
Yeah, I do kind of like my stories to kind of have an ending.
Well, I thought I have a few criticisms of this. I did think it had an ending. I thought, episode 5 was very much the lots of shooting and then it's all over episode.
I thought that was episode 4 too. Except it wasn't all over. But let's get into the episode itself. I've set the stage for why I was not coming into this particularly inclined to be impressed. So, what did you think of the story, Simon?
I found it quite hard going, and I similarly share a lack of fascination for the Daleks with you. I mean, I think the Daleks are an interesting concept, but my least favourite thing in any Doctor Who Dalek story is where they sort of stand around on the bridge of one of their ships, or saucers as they are now, and they flash their lights and wibble onto each other indeterminately. And I mean, I partly don't like it because I think logically, surely these are biomechanoids. They could have more efficient information transfer systems built into their computer augmented brains that would work over radio and over distances.
They can just come up and touch plungers. Beep, beep, beep.
Yeah.
Lights flash
if you want some kind of RFID.
They say contact.
But actually, I would have thought long range radio would probably be preferable. Whatever gives you the bandwidth, fine. But it's not going to take much to exceed the bandwidth of standing there, blinking their lights at each other and grating on in their Dalek monotone. And that's the other part of it, why it's not a satisfying thing, because Nick Briggs does a good job voicing the Daleks, giving them some kind of emotion without making them seem non-Dalek-y, but it's still just Daleks droning on at each other. And you have a series of just Daleks, ! And you're going to have a lot of Daleks talking at each other, or in this case, Daleks talking at other mechanical entities of one sort or another.
So here's the thing that also, to your point about them talking, because they do talk a lot. Obviously, they have to talk to each other. Have you ever actually seen a Dalek tell another Dalek what they're doing? No, they never actually have substantive conversations. They're all just basically drop the bomb now, or exterminate them, or they never actually, even in this one where we had the smart Dalek and we had the Emperor Dalek, they still never actually discussed what was going on. They hid that from us so that it would be a surprise, which in that way is good, but again, what we get is basically fatuous Daleks talking to each other. And you're right, Nick Briggs can do enough of the different Dalek voices that it sounds like different Daleks, and you could even tell them apart to some degree. But it's still just Dalek talking. So the third strike is it's Daleks, and it's Daleks who are the main focus of the story as opposed to the villains of the story. So
yes, Daleks ! Which for some reason always puts me in mind of the Gideon Defoe Pirates series. So it's Pirates! In an adventure with scientists. Daleks! In an adventure with an entity.
Or mechanoids, yeah. It's so.
But that is the selling point. People buy Daleks. I mean,
yeah, I know. That I also found it a bit hard going. I originally was not going to watch it until right before we recorded all of it. I broke down when the first one came out, and I said, all right, maybe I should watch them once a week. Then I'll have to watch them again, which actually did play into that. And I watched the first one. I'm like, nope, I think I'll save them. So I saved them and watched them last night and this morning before recording. And it was a bit of a hard road. I'll agree, but I'll say this. One of the complaints we've had, and I think we actually have a Sidecar podcast we recorded last year on what makes a good Dalek story that never got released, and will someday. But one of the things that we have complained about is Dalek plans are dumb. Dalek strategies are moronic at every level. They don't accomplish any meaningful objectives, and they're just dumb. So it was nice to see a Dalek strategy that actually wasn't completely moronic here. At least I felt like the Dalek strategist was smart and playing a good game of chess there. So that is in its favor. It's still a low bar to get above for when your plan is to hollow out a planet and pilot around the universe, or to just destroy all reality because so yeah.
They were strategic, and that is nice. That is an upside to it. The strategist, by the way, was that there is in the Big Finish Doctor Who Time War stories, there is a time strategist.
I think it's the same. I think it's the same actor.
I think that's a fair bet, but I wasn't sure whether the strategist and the time strategist were the same. This didn't have a Time War vibe to me.
Not at all.
Which was interesting because He Kills Me Not is definitely Time War set. You can tell because they've used the Time War theme tune for it. So clearly Time Lord Victorious encompasses a range of Doctor Who eras.
Here's my guess. They wipe out the mechanoids. They don't know what's coming. What's coming is the Time War. That's my thought.
But the Time War's not going to take them by surprise because they
started it. Yeah.
Well,
you
could argue that the Time Lord started it by sending the Doctor to kill them at their genesis, but one way or another, they're both pretty central to the
story.
Instigation of the Time War, and it's unlikely to surprise them.
Well, I would say that if this is not Big Finish, then I would say that's not supposed to be the same strategist.
I mean, one of the things when I say it's not Big Finish, it's not produced by Big Finish, and who it is produced by is maybe something interesting to come back to. But the actual creatives involved in it, so the script is written by James Goss, who is the overall producer of all of the Time Lord Victorious stuff across all the different platforms. But he is also a regular producer and writer on Big Finish Productions. I think that the audio stuff is all directed by Scott Hancock. He directs a load of audio stuff and writes for Big Finish. Nick Briggs is in it playing the Daleks. He plays the Daleks for Big Finish and also is the executive producer of Big Finish. So it's not like anyone at Big Finish is going to be surprised by what's in this story. I think there's enough of or vice versa, that the people making this would be unaware of what was going on. Even if it weren't a multi-platform story, they are the same people and they know what stories are being told in the different strands of the Doctor Who merchandise spin-offs.
Yeah. Okay, let me ask a question. This is my impression after I watch this episode, because as I say, I always think Dalek plans are stupid. I'm now beginning to think that there is just the one smart Dalek theory, because the Emperor seems like as big a buffoon as all the rest of them, doesn't he?
Yes.
I mean, the executioner is like, yeah, shall I shoot him? It's like, wait, shoot. And it's only the strategist is the only Dalek that seems to exercise any intelligence whatsoever. And I gotta
all
say,
the other Daleks in episode 5 literally form a circular firing squad.
yes, yeah, they and where they are outnumbered, millions to one, and they only start fighting because they're a little bored on guard duty. I mean, seriously, it is ridiculous, and I think they did a pretty good job of making you realize, it's very overt, that the strategist is much smarter than the Emperor. Although apparently he's not smart enough to get down to the repair bay and get his armor fixed, because you'd think that'd be a tactical disadvantage. But
it's shabby chic.
Yeah. And so he's, you can be believed by the end, thinking that maybe he would turn on the Emperor, although it's pretty obvious that he's not, because in episode 2, he's given that very opportunity, and he does not. So both the mechanoids and the entity make the exact same mistake, that the smarter Dalek, which, let's face it, if Daleks aren't equal amongst themselves, then you would think they would do exactly what would come natural to Daleks. We're better, therefore we should be in charge. The strategist is better, therefore he should be in charge. You would think that is the logical extension of Dalek programming and philosophy. And so the entity makes that mistake. The mechanoids make that mistake. It costs them both badly. That's the only interesting thing. That's the only part of this story that I found fascinatingly like, all right, but what keeps the strategist loyal to the Emperor then? How dumb does a plan have to get on the Emperor's behalf? Because obviously all the other Daleks are willing to go out and die. The whole planet worth of Daleks are apparently willing to die to execute this plan. I don't know. I guess programming.
You have to assume that the Emperor is not. The Emperor is working with the strategist to execute the strategist's plans. If the Emperor became a barrier to those, then the strategist, in the interests of the Daleks, you would think he would go, well, maybe the Emperor shouldn't be the Emperor.
Do we really think that the Emperor Dalek was acting when the mechanoids and the strategist ran off to the tower and he started shouting, "Betrayal! Destroy them!" and wiping them out? It did seem like, again, that he was, in fact, caught unawares by this plant. I don't know. That's kind of why I'm asking. Is there only one smart Dalek? The strategist is pulling all the strings, and the Emperor is just a puppet that he manipulates, or manipulates. He guides along the path that needs to be done, because that's what the strategist is designed to do. But yeah,
it's a Wizard of Oz scenario, I guess.
And the theme is temptation, because they keep coming back and trying to tempt the strategist with power, which he never takes. I also kind of liked the symmetry that they developed, which is the robot on the Dalek army planet, which has been taken over by the entity, so we'll call it the entity, but he subverts the Dalek army for his purposes by getting permission from the strategist to make some last-minute updates. Which I actually felt like right before this podcast when I started Skype and it said, there are some updates. Should I install them? And I'm like, no, you know something? I've learned my lesson. I'm not going to do that. It's going to be taken over by the entity and it's not going to work. So and then they do literally exactly the same thing at the end in Flip. The mechanoid sets up everything and then the strategist comes in. I need to make just a couple last-minute changes to this program. Boom, and now it wipes them all out. So, as hard, slow fighting, blast, boring, but still kind of better than most Dalek stories than I've seen, which has surprised the heck out of me. Not saying I would watch it again anytime soon. But it was no destiny of the Daleks.
The symmetry that you mention is there in a number of cases because I did like episode 1. I actually thought it was the strongest episode because it had its own narrative, and I liked the twist. I liked the fact that the Daleks were going in there perfectly logically. Let's overpower the librarian so we can seize the archive, and the librarians are playing a trick on them in order to get them in there, and they've done this deal with the devil essentially, and that's a nice reveal. And then you get the Daleks doing exactly the same thing to the entity with the mechanoids, which is the Daleks then lead the entity in and
That's true.
give it to the mechanoids in effect. So the Daleks are outwitted in episode 1. We don't like stupid Daleks, but they're outwitted in a way that I think is forgivable in the sense that you would not expect something that powerful to have been on that planet. But they then learn from it.
And they're outwitted in episode 2.
Aha. There is a strategy that we can use to our own advantages, and they do.
That's right. So yeah, they're outwitted in 1 and 2, and then they use those exact same strategies in essentially 3 and 4 and 5. Yeah. So I mean that is something in its favor. Part of the reason I stopped watching after episode 1 was because, and I had the same feeling when I watched it the second time yesterday. The Daleks come in, we want the archive. That was their stated goal. We want the archive. What do? They come in blowing up the planet. They're blowing up the planet. Can we have the archive? No. Okay. The Dalek strategist comes in. Wait a minute. Let's try blowing up the planet. Okay. And then they start blowing up the planet some more. I'm like, I'm not following this. Because clearly they're not going to blow up the archive if they want it, if they think there's still a chance of getting it. And then there's the whole bit. If they think
there is a chance of getting it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure they'd blow it up if they knew they couldn't get it, as the Emperor says. But as a stratagem to convince them up front, they didn't seem to really have a plan other than let's blow some stuff up and see if they give it to us. And then, wait, let's try a different approach. Let's blow some stuff up and see if they give it to us. Nope, that didn't work. Let's tell them, hey, we'll blow you up if you don't give it to us. Oh, okay. I mean, they're consistent. Plan is blow stuff up till we get what we want. But it didn't feel like... There were beats along here where it seemed like they were changing strategy when they never changed strategy. Does that make sense? And I just I think we wasted some time here just so we could blow things up. Which, by the way, the Islos defensive guards are the worst shots in the universe, Imperial stormtroopers notwithstanding. I mean, that fleet flying in and the defensive grid is firing in the wrong direction. Repeatedly. Daleks here, weapons going over there. Failure of animation? don't
think they need to.
know.
Yeah, they need to get their guns serviced.
Yeah.
It might be that it's convenient for the animators that they keep missing because their explosion effects are somewhat iffy.
Yeah, I noticed that. They were a little bit iffy. I also noticed there were a lot of situations where, like when the mechanoids and the Daleks are coming up to each other and there's lots of bolts firing, they're not hitting each other. Like, wait,
No,
you guys would hit every time. Surely you would hit every time. But they don't. They're just firing past each other a lot. So, yeah.
I think I mean there is an interesting dimension to this in the execution of it, because I think that the way in which it has been animated, there are some kind of obvious shortcomings, and amongst those are things like the effects for explosions or smoke, and also in a number of respects the way in which they use textures. The whole thing is done in 3D, and a lot of it is textured, but the movements are very sudden. they're not programmed gently, and they are everything is very geometrical. So there are a lot of camera swinging around or panning around very suddenly. It goes from traveling in a circle at this speed to traveling up or zooming out at that speed, and the transition is instantaneous.
Like a machine.
And like a machine, not like a camera.
So that could be artistic choice. There are no, I mean, apart from
it could be an artistic choice. It is, I think, a question of speed and convenience, because it doesn't convey the physics of. So these are things that have to do with the physics, the explosions or the smoke or whatever. I don't know, because I mean I have seen more convincing explosions, what exactly the particular constraints are here. I know that rendering would be a very time expensive process compared to the very kind of geometric planes that almost everything else is made up of. It may be simpler than that. It may be that the kind of algorithms for generating these things were unavailable to them on the budgets that they had. But there are aspects of the story where that definitely is obvious, and there are other aspects where it's clear they've tried to work around it.
So remind me, because I don't remember what the mechanoids' weapons looked like in the original series. What did they project out? Was it smoke? Was it bubbles? Because if I were looking at this, I would think they were projecting a bubble machine.
I think the mechanoids in this are supposed to have flamethrowers. And I
would never have gotten that. I'd have never gotten that from the bubbles coming out of them.
Didn't they have flamethrowers before? But then, when I say before, they've only appeared in The Chase, haven't they?
Correct.
Because I know that, for example, they're in the Juggernaut, so I'm thinking, they're a recurring villain, but they're probably not. And so I can't remember what they fire in The Chase.
Well, it's a bubble gun. It's a Lawrence Welk bubble gun, firing out bubbles of soapy water at the Daleks, which apparently
literally like blowing bubbles through.
That's what it looked like to me. In this, not I don't know. I don't remember.
Oh, see, no, but in the Chase.
Yeah, I don't remember at all.
Right, no.
So I did fight with this.
I can see bubbles would be difficult to execute as well, because all of the reflections and what have you. And I felt there were areas in this where it did kind of show up that um, the planetary surface was incredibly flat, for example, and in a way that is very much like 1970s Doctor Who, because whenever you went into a cave system or whatever, it had a floor that, coincidentally enough, was as smooth as a TV studio floor. So maybe you could argue there is a tradition for that, but it looks kind of odd.
Yeah, I didn't have too much trouble with the look of this. Like I said, I think you got with the explosions and smoke and things like that. It definitely had a sort of
put it
compromise
this way.
look.
It does not have the budget of even the most recent animations of Fury from the Deep, or of the Faceless Ones.
For something they're going to put free on YouTube, sure, I can imagine it does not
exactly.
have. Except, of course, it's trying to drive people into Time Lord Victorious, which is the point of a bundling system. So you'd think that maybe maybe Big Finish and the novels people would all chip in a little bit of money to make a good.
Now you see that was one of the things that I was wondering about, because I think that may be overly ambitious. I suspect that they had to fund this out of the money that the Doctor Who marketing people have. I think that's why it's on YouTube. I mean, one reason it's on YouTube is, again, so coming back to the whole Time Lord Victorious setup, one of the things that the BBC is not allowed to do as part of its charter is to drive people towards products that they have to pay for. So if you had started a story, start like your Spider-Man story, starting on an official BBC platform and then finishing on in an Iron Man story, if the equivalent of that was on something that was licensed and chargeable and all the rest of it, that's not allowed. The way the BBC is set up is to have all of its enterprises that raise money from its properties, its intellectual properties like Doctor Who, are part of an arm's length setup. So they can create something that is part of this bigger Time Lord Victorious thing and put it on YouTube and have it show you adverts. And I wonder how much of the budget just came from YouTube adverts. They couldn't have put it on iPlayer because that would have fallen foul of their charter. But also, they wouldn't have been able to fund it through adverts on there. They would have had to get money from elsewhere. So it's not really, you're right, it's not really fair to compare it to animations that are funded from a bigger budget through the sales of Blu-rays and so forth. It's in a way more comparable to those animations on BBC, the old BBC website. The things like Sidecar or Sharda or Real Time,
oh yeah.
which did have quite, we looked at those in our animation series, and the animation there was really, really, really basic. But what really basic animation meant 20 years ago was very different from what basic animation means now. This whole thing is done with 3D animation.
I got to tell you,
it was Flash.
These new M1 Max, I think, in a year, the processing power, they're going to be able to do this on, a little MacBook Air and for free, practically. So I think we're going to see a lot better animation.
That's the cost. The cost is not. It is not necessarily rendering it. The cost is actually animating the thing in a way
Back
that is convincing, which is why you
back to your
get
point
people
earlier. Back to your point earlier
linear
about it
path.
being render intensive. You were saying that
Oh,
the physics,
for the smoke. Yeah,
the technology is going to
yes,
pass that, and
yes.
has probably already passed it, and we just haven't seen it whiz by yet. But
Yeah,
all
and
of
you
those,
know, it would be possible to re-render the thing if you know if that were the issue, then you could upgrade it at some point in the future if you had the money and it was sufficiently cheap.
worthwhile.
What you can't do is the fact that in order to produce something that could be animated on this tiny budget, they have obviously gone for something which would be very geometrical, lots of planes that, you know, the
Lots of
mechanoids,
robots. Yeah.
for example. The fact that this sentinel on the planet of the Dalek army is basically Johnny Five from Short Circuit, rather than something more organic or
The
even
archivists
human.
are robots too.
All of the kind of characters in this are somewhat robotic, and that doesn't help with the whole you've got robots talking to each other for 68 minutes kind of problem with this. I don't necessarily think that having the Daleks as the focus of the story is a problem in itself. Having listened to some of, for example, the Dalek Empire series from, you know, Big Finish audio series, entirely focused on Dalek machinations or whatever, but in order to tell the story of the Dalek Empire, it's told from the perspective of a set of protagonists who are the resistance to the Dalek Empire. And that gives you characters it's much easier to relate to because they are the organics, the humans or humanoids at least, the oppressed, not the robotic oppressors.
Who are you rooting for in this? The Daleks or the mechanoids?
I'm definitely rooting for the mechanoids out of them. Yeah.
Is it because they made the mechanoids more human? Oh, we have a concept of beauty. We have, you know, they went out of their way to make them seem more human, I guess, if you will.
Which in a way is, you know, they are less. They are entirely mechanical. The Daleks are
biological,
genetically evolved humanoids, but there's a lot more to relate to in the values that these evolved mechanoids seem to be espousing.
They're big on beauty.
Though there are moments where the Daleks in this, or at least the Emperor, he talks about the strategy being beautiful.
At the end,
and there's a point in the penultimate episode where he tells the mechanoids he would enjoy seeing them fight, which is an interesting choice of words for a Dalek.
It was. I had a note of that.
It would be useful to see you fight. It's I would get an emotional response from seeing you fight.
And they, you know, one of the things we have in this episode, this reminds me, is that the Emperor Dalek he lies by omission. So, for example, how many Daleks are left, he doesn't say. Then she goes, oh, it's just you guys. He doesn't really confirm it. That is a lie of omission. When she asks him what he finds beautiful, he does not give an answer to that question. I think there's a way he prevaricates or evades answering that question. And of course, then the point of that was at the end when the strategist asked if his strategy efficient. The Emperor is like, it was beautiful. So we know what beauty to a Dalek is. An efficient killing strategy. Is that the difference? The strategist could not even conceive of that?
I don't know. I wondered if the Emperor was supposed to in some way be an emotional Dalek, but I couldn't see the value in it. It wasn't a kind of Cult of Skaro type, let's try and understand our enemies better, or even being emotional makes you a better leader. It just seemed to be a slight anomaly in the way that this particularly bulbous Dalek behaved.
Why is he particularly bulbous? Is he supposed to be a really big brain in there? Is he an extra big Dalek, or is it just he needs? He's got the comfy room with the jacuzzi in there.
Is it a callback or foreshadowing for Remembrance to try and explain why the supposed Emperor in Remembrance looks like that?
Because he's really Davros.
Spoilers.
Well, yeah, I'm not counting spoilers on something that's 30 years old, whatever it is. But yeah, maybe. I mean, maybe this is supposed to be Davros.
I don't think I know. I don't. That wasn't my thinking. My thinking was it trying to set up some kind of scenario in which it wasn't particularly surprising that an emperor looked like the Imperial Emperor looks like in Remembrance? Because obviously within Remembrance there is an alternative reason.
Since I don't collect these things, I don't know, but aren't there like the Dalek comics? Didn't they have an Emperor Dalek that had a big head? I mean, I know the main Dalek in Evil looks like a cyber controller or something, but it seems like that's not just from Remembrance, that I've seen that big bulbous Emperor Dalek many times before. So, I mean, I saw it and I was like, oh, it's Emperor Dalek. You know that. I mean, it's a lot easier to tell.
Different, which, yeah, I mean, you can see why. I don't know. I mean, I haven't followed the comics. It could well be that, and it would be appropriate in a multi-platform story like this to cater for audiences who will be familiar with the Emperor Dalek in that form. For my money, I think the Emperor Dalek in The Parting of the Ways was the coolest one, but there we go.
He was big as well, but...
He was big and he lived in a big old fish tank. He didn't look like a Dalek. He didn't move around. But
yeah,
he's got standard Daleks to do all that for him, so why does he need it?
Yeah, true. Do you have anything else on this thing? I don't think that I do.
No, I don't think I do. I think we've pretty much covered it. I'm not rushing back to rewatch it myself. I think it's interesting that they managed to put something together. I agree with you that there are interesting aspects to the storyline, and all the audio side of it is as impressive. Using the same directors and sound designers as the Big Finish stuff. It's as good as the Big Finish stuff, but the animation is low budget, and that the story does its best to work around that, but it must be a really low budget for the reasons we've discussed, and ultimately that's what you're left kind of slogging through. And there were points where I was thinking, do the bods in BBC marketing really want their crown jewel, Doctor Who, to be associated with something that looks quite this naff? And another part of me would hate that they would kind of get involved in putting the kibosh on something that's experimental and innovative. So I'm glad they've done it, but it's a measure of quite how rough some of it looked to my eyes.
I wasn't bothered by it, but I wasn't really impressed by it either. It was serviceable. It's Daleks. It's you know they glide nicely in animation like this, as do the mechanoids.
They do, but they still,
As opposed to looking like a
their
guy on a
contact
tricycle. You know,
Yes,
there's that.
I think there's a balance somewhere in there, and the problem is the way that they glide. You just get a sense that there is no physics in operation. They kind of seem to glide over because they had platforms that went up and down, and they matched so perfectly that when the Dalek glided over it, there was no bump or judder or anything that you'd put that kind of thing in. When they go out onto the planetary surface, there's obviously a texture with a roughness to the surface. Within the 3D model, that is just a two-dimensional texture. They glide straight over it. When you get the mechanoids on Skaro, they form themselves into these very geometrically organized battalions. In fact, any kind of fight sequence in there is a kind of geometry in the way that they all stand in a very, very, very regular pattern, and they move together. And of course, it's because you can just clone the same object, and you can animate all of your objects together. So that looks like a convenience, and in a way, what you need to do as an animator is work to introduce the imperfections. If you're making Game of Thrones or something like that, and you're essentially dealing with live action, and you want your army to look like a Roman army, incredibly precisely organized in rows and columns, and to march together in absolute unison, you put all of your effort into getting that as perfect as you possibly can, because you know that what you're dealing with are real humans and the flaws and imperfections are there already. But for the animators, they've got to go the other way. They've got something straight out of the box that is perfect if they want to have that kind of geometrical arrangement. And what they need to put their effort into is creating those flaws and imperfections that make it look like real physics and real world stuff is in action.
I in a way, I feel like that obviously part of the reason they went with robotics for everything was because they could get to that geometric thing. But wouldn't the mechanoids materializing on the obviously flat surfaces of the city of Skaro, because Daleks all roll on wheels as well, wouldn't they move in precise, perfect alignment? I mean, so it's a convenience for the animator that of all the things that they could put in a battle formation in columns, mechanoids would be in perfect columns. They probably have a little routine that says 1 meter, 0.4 distance.
Yeah,
stop.
I think that is the point I'm making about the animators working around these shortcomings. But nothing is perfect, and the surface of the planet Skaro does not look completely flat because there is this slightly rough texture.
No, once they're out of the city, yes, but when they were in the city, I mean...
So it doesn't quite work. And actually, because of the way they move, it almost looks like they're hovering, because the way it looks, if they were a few inches above the ground, you can't tell that they're not just supposed to be a few feet further back. There's nothing to situate them, and so a lot of the time I'm looking at it thinking they could be hovering. I mean, they're moving so smoothly, maybe they're supposed to be hovering, but I don't think it is that. I think it is just that they are moving over a 2D textured surface, and there's no kind of gyration in or juddering in the way that they move across that ground as if they've just hit a stone or whatever, that would actually in their movement convey the fact that they are in contact with the ground.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah, no, I get your point. I will admit though, I'm very surprised that in actual Doctor Who, they haven't in the new series at some point had somebody go, "How could they get anywhere? They're on wheels," and to have the Doctor go, "Actually, Daleks aren't on wheels; they're hovering. They've always been hovering a little electromagnetic repulsive magnetor beam," and so because I don't think we've ever seen. We've probably seen wheels on them when one got flipped, but we don't really know that they're on wheels. They could be on repulsor beams anyway. But anyway, I think we should probably kill it at that. Yeah. Well, yeah, and then they actually can fly up off the ground as well. Yeah. So.
Or remembrance, in fact.
But that seemed to be the exception instead of the rule, as opposed to just glide along. If you have nothing else, I have nothing else.
I have nothing else. But this further chapter in the many and varied forms of animated Doctor Who or Doctor Who related stuff.
All right. Well, in that case, since this is a Sidecar episode, there is no Join Us Next Time, but I'm sure that there is an episode of Fusion Patrol coming soon, any day now. Within a week, there will probably be an episode released. Whenever you get this, there will probably be. So, Simon, thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure, as always.
And listeners, I do hope you'll join us all again next time on Fusion Patrol.